right, we're going to talk Tampa Bay Bucs football on the Our Lads Football Network. And at least for one more year, we'll be talking to David Harrison, who's been covering the Bucs and been part of our collection of reporters here on the Our Lads Football Network for several years now. And, of course, you can now check out David on his YouTube Locked On podcast channel. It's actually Locked On Bucs YouTube channel. How long has that been on YouTube, David?
Locked On Bucs, I think it's a little over a year now, I believe, since we started doing that.
So relatively new. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, check it out. We got it in the description area. You'll find a link, and you could also see it there in the ticker. Check it out. And as far as content, though, David, what is the best? And of course, we'll provide links. But where can people find not only Bucs, but want to let everybody know too that you're covering the Washington football team as well. So you've got kind of double duty for a few years, and that's why you're going to make the transition to Washington pretty much full time next year, correct?
Yeah. I'm still at Locked On Bucs for right now. You know, we're doing that 5 days a week for the Locked On Podcast Network, and that's, like you said, it's on YouTube. It's also on pretty much anywhere you listen to audio podcasts, you can find Locked On Bucs, and you also find Locked On Commanders, which, like you mentioned, I'm hosting there. And then for Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation group, I'm writing for CommanderCountry.com and BucsGameDay.com as well. And look, if you're a basketball fan, if you're a Wizards fan, I also write for InsideTheWizards.com. So a lot of projects going on these days, but you can find me pretty much everywhere.
Well, that's a good thing to be busy.
Yeah,
that's nice. Yep. And well, at least we got you for one more year covering the Bucs, and hey, you got the opportunity to cover the team when they won the Super Bowl. So That's nice. That's never easy. That's pretty fortunate. So I don't think that's going to happen in your final year, though. But hey, you never know. Stranger things have happened. We'll talk about what to look forward to as far as the Bucs camp is concerned. But look, the big story, naturally, is what's going to go on at that quarterback position. And Baker gets his shot again. I think the one thing that I'm interested to see out of Baker is that it looked like under McVay, maybe, and it shouldn't be a surprise that it looked like he was playing as good as we've seen him play since the year he took the team to the postseason, the Browns. But now he doesn't have McVay anymore. So is that just a McVay thing? Who knows? Because the Bucs have a first-year offensive coordinator as well, correct? So now we've got a first-year coordinator and a new quarterback trying to resurrect his career.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that the biggest thing that I've kind of drawn about Baker Mayfield from the experience that he went through last year, it's easy to kind of get caught up in this conversation of he played for 3 teams in less than 12 months. He's on his 4th team in less than a full calendar year. And anytime you say that, if I were to tell you that there was an NFL quarterback that would be in that situation, you'd probably think that guy is not very talented and not very likely to be on a football field playing anytime soon. But when you put context behind what Baker Mayfield went through, right? This is a Cleveland Browns organization that, quite frankly, has a history of not handling quarterbacks correctly. And it's not so much about making excuses for Baker Mayfield, but you look at what he was able to do for the franchise, able to take them to the playoffs for the first time in forever for most people, able to get a playoff win on top of it, and then how quickly things really kind of turned against him within that organization as he's playing through injury, as he's playing through other players getting injured, other teammates having drama within the organization. And a lot of it, it's very common that it gets piled at the quarterback's feet. And when you go back to when he was drafted, coming out of Oklahoma, the immaturity comments about him and all these other things, it's really easy to kind of see how we got back to this place where it's just all got to be Baker's fault. But if you look at the state of the Cleveland Browns, there's other markers there to show you that it's not just a quarterback situation, it's an environment situation. The Carolina Panthers are another dysfunctional situation he gets dropped into. You basically have a head coach in Matt Rule who understands that if he doesn't show his ownership that he's got some sign of life in this franchise, he's not going to have a job anymore. So he basically grabs at any quarterback he can possibly grab onto to say, maybe this guy will be my life raft. Neither Baker Mayfield nor Sam Darnold proved to be that guy. And now Matt Rule is back in college where, honestly, he's a better fit. He should have never left. I don't blame him for pursuing the NFL coaching dream. I get it. But you tried it. It didn't work. do what Nick Saban did, go back to college, stay there, and try to become a great college head coach. And then you go to the Los Angeles Rams, and I think what you really see with the Los Angeles Rams, honestly, is the culmination of Baker Mayfield maturing into a quarterback who understands kind of where he is, who he is, and what that means to the NFL. And then you have crossroads there. You make a decision. You can either become the bitter, despondent guy that's just going to fight everybody, or you can kind of be the put your head down, quiet guy who just goes to work and does his job. And in Tampa so far, that's really what we've seen. Don't get me wrong. Baker still likes to joke. He's still got that kind of sarcastic humor to him. And he still has that little bit of edge you can see when he's talking and doing press conferences and stuff. But I think that he kind of understands how he needs to kind of balance that in order to make sure that his personality doesn't take over his play.
One of the things that really was looked at as far as, well, this is a big reason why he hasn't played as well effectively as he did the playoff year with the injuries. Is that still a potential issue, or is that now something that's in his past, unless he gets re-injures himself, that's not going to come into play or be a reason why he may struggle this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, anytime you injure a body part, obviously they always tell you the likelihood of injuring it again is greater, right? It doesn't guarantee a re-injury, but the potential to re-injure is always there. But at this stage in Baker Mayfield's recovery, career progress, all that stuff, I don't think those injuries or the significant injuries that specifically kind of derailed his time in Cleveland there at the end are further bothering him or a hindrance to him currently with the Buccaneers. There's been no sign and no comments about any type of physical ailments and any I know that there was some social media heat over some bad throws that made it to video and made it to Twitter. And the only thing I can say about that is every quarterback has bad throws in training. I saw Tom Brady have bad throws in training camps and in practices. I mean, it's it's going to happen. But when that's all you see, that's what you latch onto. But no, none of that is a physical limitation. All of that is growing pains of, like you said, getting into a new system, getting into a new place, having new receivers, and just figuring out the chemistry.
Is he a lock to be the starter on opening day?
To me, he is. Yeah, I mean the team is still maintaining the competition, and they're and to their credit, during OTAs and minicamp, he and Kyle Trask split reps, and they would rotate in with the ones and do all this stuff, and that's the expectation for training camp as well. And the preseason, you're going to see them each get a start and play with the ones and all this stuff. And I can't necessarily say that I agree with the mentality. It seems pretty clear to mostly everybody. And when you see the players doing this dead period media that they sometimes do, by and large, they're all praising Baker Mayfield. Kyle Trask really comes up as an afterthought or as a side note. So the locker room, it appears, has clearly kind of picked a side. So if the coaches know it, the players know it. To me, on the outside looking in, no reason to really keep up the charade, right? But they have their reasonings. They have their reasonings for doing it, whatever those are. They're NFL coaches. I'm not. So we'll just trust that they're doing the right thing because they have a plan.
So we're at the point now where that was just a bad draft pick, Trask.
I mean, Kyle Trask, like, the interesting thing about Kyle Trask is it's all about expectation management, right? And you have a back end of the second round quarterback selection. Do you really expect a back end second round quarterback to become your starter, or do you hope he'll become your starter, right? And I kind of look at like Jalen Hurts. Like when Jalen Hurts was drafted, nobody kind of talked about him being the heir apparent, the next starting quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles.
It does not happen very often. No.
Right. It was more so if Carson Wentz doesn't get better, if Carson Wentz doesn't get back on track, now we have a young guy in development that maybe we can turn to. And if we're being honest, and if we're not, having revisionist history, I went on a Philadelphia Eagles podcast last offseason, preseason, talking to them about the Commanders, talking to them about the Eagles. And I mentioned to them that I was a Jalen Hurts believer. I thought Jalen Hurts had what it took to be a good quality starting quarterback in the NFL. I didn't predict Super Bowl. Okay, I'm not gonna toot my own horn too much. I didn't do that, but I did say I believed in Jalen Hurts. That Eagles podcast host actually said, "Well, if I offered you, or if I said, hey, you can have Jalen Hurts for a first round pick, would you take that deal?" I said, yes, I would take that deal in a heartbeat. And it was meant as they wouldn't think I would take that deal. You know what I mean? So now, if you ask every Eagles podcast, would you trade Jalen Hurts for a first round pick? They'll tell you you're crazy. It's going to take at least 5 first round picks and your firstborn child. Like, so revisionist history is interesting, but this time last year, there weren't a whole lot of people who believed in Jalen Hurts as a franchise quarterback coming out of the second round. And related to second round picks. Kyle Trask was drafted later. So I think expectation management is the biggest thing. I think too many people coined Kyle Trask the starting quarterback ahead of time before he was really ready to be. But at the same time, the franchise didn't do a whole lot to deter people from that either. So there's a little bit of ownership on each side of the aisle.
All right. But either way, getting a start with the ones in camp, I'm just guessing this is going to be his biggest opportunity, especially after a couple of years now of being a pro. This is his opportunity to showcase whether or not he is at least improving.
Yeah, I mean, you can at least show that he's improving, right? And that would be key because last year during training camp, he had a lot of rough. Every quarterback has bad throws. Not every quarterback has a lot of bad throws. And Kyle Trask had a lot of bad throws.
Yeah,
and when the Dolphins came to town, he struggled very, very mightily. Now, when the preseason game came out, and again, it's not necessarily ones versus ones. Like the Dolphins sat a lot of their starters, the Bucs sat a lot of their starters. But he's out there playing real football. Contact is real. All those things. He did do well, and then he struggled for a stretch. Then he kind of bounced back a little bit, but so it was kind of a mixed bag. So you do hope to at least see that improvement from him because he's still a young guy. When you talk about him having like this being his best opportunity, and it might be his best opportunity in Tampa, but I mean we've seen a quarterback like Colt McCoy come into the NFL with much more fanfare and then fizzle out and then end up getting opportunities. Look, a lot of people, we kind of crack jokes about like the Josh McCowns of the world and I mean Colt McCoys of the world and all that stuff. But look, those guys have had very long careers, very successful careers, made a lot of money, and they got to be NFL players doing it. So I mean, in the NFL world, they may be kind of on the peripheral, but to the rest of the world, like how many of us get to live this NFL dream that most guys grow up with that are in this space? Not that many. So he's getting to do that as well. So, to a certain silver lining effect, that's a success in itself.
Well, yeah, because not every quarterback is going to be a long-term starter. There's going to be quarterbacks like the ones you mentioned that, hey, as long as you can be in the league a long time and you're primarily a number two, maybe you get a shot every few years to be a starter. Nothing wrong with that. So, but still need to see, obviously, some improvement there to find out whether or not he can be that type of guy. What's his biggest issue? Is it accuracy?
Yeah, it's definitely his accuracy, and it's things compounding. Pressure is always cumulative. That's something that's been said in football for a very, very long time. But as a quarterback, the pressure of bad throws or missed reads, you have to let that wash off, right? When you talk about pressure being cumulative, you're usually talking about quarterback hits, sacks, things like that. That's going to happen. But when you mess up as an individual player, you have to be able to take the lesson from it, move on, and let it go because you can't just try to make up the last bad throw with another successful throw. That's not how this works, and that's never going to play your way. And that's really where I would like to see Kyle Trask take that next step this preseason.
Okay, let's go through the roster and definitely go into key position battles. Taking a look at I'll pop up the depth chart, the RLAD's depth chart for the Tampa Bay Bucs here. We'll start on offense. The offensive line, of course, we could say you can spend all day on the quarterback position, and we all know how important that is in the NFL, especially this year with Mayfield. But the offensive line is really, I mean, that's the spot, isn't it, for Tampa Bay? That's the one that they really have to make sure that they get fixed up because just taking a look at it, Wirfs and Jensen. And then after that, it's, you kind of think that Filer is a nice little holdover guy. But the other couple of spots, relying on a couple of second-round picks, rookie from last year and rookie from this year. So far, what's the word on that right side of the line?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of question marks. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, during the OTA period, mini camp period, like there's no pads, there's no contact. It's really hard to evaluate offensive linemen. It's kind of hard to really evaluate defensive linemen as well until the pads come on. So, what you're hoping for is, like you mentioned, Luke Gedeke moves from guard last year as a rookie. Now he gets to go back out to right tackle and presumably get an opportunity to become the starter. That's his more organic position where he played in college. Cody Mount comes in. He's kind of highly touted. A lot of people had high grades on him and high hope for him. And I will tell you just from watching him at the Senior Bowl when we were down there in Mobile, that dude is a beast and a monster. If he struggles in the NFL more than like your average rookie, if he has like significant struggles in the NFL, I will be surprised because he certainly looks the part. Matt Filer, like you mentioned, he's a veteran, but how is he going to mesh in that group? And then Tristan Wirfs move to the left side. Really, when you get down to it, even though Tristan Wirfs has obviously been starting and starring on this offensive line for years now, there's 4 new starters on this roster in general. 5 new starters if you go back to the regular season opener where Ryan Jensen is injured. So he's obviously not starting at center. Tristan Wirfs is the right tackle, not the left. So you have a new starting left tackle, a new starting center for this season, and the other pieces. So really, that's what the Buccaneers are dealing with is 5 new starters on their offensive line when you get down to the brass tacks of it. And I always lean on Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks' saying about football. It's really hard to be a bad football team when you're good in the trenches, but the opposite also applies too. If you're bad in the trenches, it's really hard to be a good football team. So like you said, this Buccaneers offensive line needs to step up. They need to gel as quickly. I don't know, man. Go bowling every afternoon. Go
Yeah.
go play volleyball or something. Like do as much as you can to become a unit because the faster they get together, the faster they gel, the better off this team is going to be.
Yeah, because this is the other thing. We talk about Baker Mayfield, and you can say all you want about how he plays, but it's not going to be potentially all his fault if he doesn't have the time in the pocket. And that's something that's going to be very important for Mayfield's growth and the entire team. So the other thing I was a little bit surprised about, and I don't know how much you talked about this after the draft, was that, Mock, good pick. Okay, maybe he's going to be a full-time guy there for a long time. But that was it. Considering the importance and the question marks on the offensive line, were you surprised that they did not add more talent? Of course, Filer, a free agent, okay, but again, that's pretty much it.
So coming into it, we definitely had tackle as a top need and priority. We had interior offensive linemen, so a guy like Cody Mauch was definitely up there as well. But we really kind of expected a tackle to go in the first round. Now, in my final mock draft that I dropped the morning of the NFL draft, by that time, a lot of these names that had kind of been hanging around as potential picks for the Buccaneers at tackle, guys like Darnell Wright out of Tennessee, their stock had just shot up. And people were talking to scouts inside of buildings and getting inside rumors and murmurs about Darnell Wright's going to go before everybody expects him to go. So really all of the tackles that you kind of said, okay, these guys are going to be first round type guys were gone, and it kind of takes you back to when Tristan Wirfs came out. Tristan Wirfs was one of 4 offensive tackles that pretty much everybody wanted. Well, for the Buccaneers, pick 14 comes up and he's still on the board. So they make the move. They trade up with San Francisco. They get their guy. Well, this year, the tackles that were first round caliber, they're going off the board too high for Tampa to really make that trade because you're going to give up way too much capital for one player on a roster where you need a lot. So with that in mind, when I did my mock draft, I actually had Kalijah Kancey as my final mock draft pick for the Buccaneers, not because defensive tackle, defensive line was a bigger need per se, but because I looked at it and said, okay, if this team can't get their tackle, you're not going to go interior offensive line in the first round. That's very rare. Like the Quentin Nelsons of the world are very, very rare. So you're not going to go there most likely. But where would Todd Bowles want to go? Well, he's been saying he wants to improve his organic pass rush. He wants to improve penetration from his down linemen, his 3 down linemen. So who's the best down lineman pass rusher left on the board around the time the Buccaneers pick? Kalijah Kancey. That's why I went there. And to me, it's apparent that's why they went there. Not that because they didn't think tackle was a need or want tackle necessarily, but because the tackles they wanted were gone, and this was the next best option for their team.
And what about just once you get to the later rounds, like even my team, the Jets, drafted an offensive tackle from Pittsburgh in the 4th round. So what about, was that disappointing? Were you surprised that they didn't add another lineman at some point after round 2?
No, because when you look at the Buccaneers offensive line, and this is going to be a kind of a weird thing to say because typically it's not this way. The Buccaneers' problem with their offensive line is their starters. Their problem is not really with their depth because when you go into their depth, Brandon Walton is a guy who's played in spots for them and done fairly well, held his own, right? Robert Hainsey is a guy who started for Ryan Jensen, and a lot of people forget he came into last year's training camp expected to compete for that starting left guard job that eventually went to Luke Gedeke.
Okay.
Nick Leverett has been a stable veteran as well as a backup offensive lineman. Aaron Stinney was a starting offensive lineman for the Super Bowl team because of Alex Kappa's injury. So they have a lot of experience and a lot of depth on the offensive line. The issue wasn't depth. The issue was starters. So you go out there and you draft a 3rd, 4th, 5th round offensive lineman. You're really just adding into a pile in the middle that you've already got pretty thick when you compare it to other NFL teams. So really what you wanted is that top coverage. Once that top coverage was gone, now it's really time to make other plans. Go ahead and make the move to Tristan Wirfs to the left side, make the move for Luke Gedeke to the right side, draft an interior offensive lineman. You already signed a free agent interior offensive lineman, and then you move on filling up other spots.
Okay. Who's the number 1 tackle or swing tackle? Who's that guy that if there's an issue with Wirfs or with Gedeke, who steps in right away?
I think it's going to be Brandon Walton. I think Brandon Walton's going to be the guy that kind of comes in. He's going to be your swing tackle, and if there's an injury, he's going to be the guy that steps in first. He's got guard, tackle. There's a lot of versatility here on the line, so that's something that'll certainly be exposed more in training camp, preseason, all
Okay.
that stuff. You'll really kind of see whoever the second left tackle is on the field. That's who's going to be. You've got some other options there, but I think from the choices you have, I probably go Brandon Walton over everybody else.
All right, good to know. Yeah, see, these are the things we learn that you only learn if you talk to somebody that covers the team. The Bucks offensive line depth isn't as bad as it looks. All right, so let's talk about the skill positions. And I know we talked last year, and I'm glad after a typical rough patch early as a rookie that Rashad White started to look everything like the running back that I thought he was going to be. One of my top picks in the entire draft outside the first round. Love the kid. Think he could be a really good player in this league, and he sure started to show that. And I'm sure that's what the Bucs feel. Fournette's gone, so this is his team now. Is that correct? And as far as the backfield is concerned.
Yeah, he's the guy. He's the running back. The question is who's going to be number two, but Rashad White's going to be the number one. And I don't feel like we're going to go back to truly old school football where you have one running back that basically just does everything all the time. I still think you're going to have a little bit of a committee, some rotational pieces in there, but the question is going to be who that guy is going to be that comes in to spell him.
All right, and then so they add Edmonds. And I guess the key rookie to keep an eye on would, as far as a free agent after the fact was Sean Tucker, because a lot of people are surprised he didn't get drafted considering the decorated college career he had.
Yeah, Sean Tucker is interesting. Again, like you said, a lot of people didn't expect him to not get drafted, and then when the draft undrafted signings started happening, Sean Tucker's name came up. I mean, you'd almost thought he was a second round pick when the news started flying about it, right? But he's a guy that's been exciting, and he's done some good things for himself in OTAs, rookie minicamp, showed up ready, from the eyes we have on BucsGameDay.com on the ground there. Didn't really look like a rookie in a rookie camp, if that makes sense. So he looked prepared, certainly for that. And a lot of people would say, well, of course he is. It's the NFL, but that's not always the case. A lot of times rookies show up to these rookie minicamps and OTAs, and they learn a very hard lesson. It takes them a little bit of time to rebound for that. So saying something like Sean Tucker showed up ready, it says something about him. But then, like you mentioned, Chase Edmonds, the addition didn't work out in Miami. I don't know if it worked out much better in Denver, but they let him move on. So he ends up with Tampa. And the question is really kind of where his value is, because is he really a better receiver than Rashad White is at this stage in the game? He's definitely not a better runner. So what's his role going to be? And then Keyshawn Vaughn getting his opportunities here in his fourth NFL season. Is he going to finally step up? And he's had flashes. There have been moments, you know what I mean? But there haven't been enough moments and enough consistency to really have faith in him. And then Patrick Laird is kind of like the veteran that you shouldn't sleep on, but nobody really expects a lot from him. But that veteran savvy can creep up on you sometimes.
Yeah, I think people forget that Vaughn was a third-round draft pick. You pick just like Rashad White. So you're a third-round draft pick. A lot is expected of you, and it hasn't happened yet for Vaughn. Remember, he had that big final year. Well, had big final year in college before he went to the NFL. So there was a lot to be intrigued about. So this is his chance. It's open. That second spot is open. So we'll keep an eye on that battle in camp. All right, wide receiver. We know who the top three are. That's for sure. That's easy. Not as much intriguing depth as there was last year. I mean, it was just loaded with players last year at wide receiver. Definitely not the case. You get to three, and then you kind of got a wide open situation after the three. Is that pretty much how it is?
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of a talent fall off after wide receiver three. And the concerning thing there is your wide receiver three is Russell Gage, who when he's on the field is actually really good. And if you take his numbers from 2022 when he was healthy and you extrapolate them to a full season, right, then he was actually on some career-setting number paces or some paces, right? So that's good. But the problem is he wasn't on the field as much as you need him to be, and unfortunately missed portions of the OTA minicamp period because he was injured again. So that is certainly concerning. But the guy who kind of seems to have stepped up the most within that absence is Trey Palmer, the rookie out of Nebraska, 6th-round draft pick. He is a guy that when he was selected, a lot of people are like, okay, that's interesting. The more people start reading and watching about him, the more they started getting a little bit excited about his potential. The problem in a team like this and Baker Mayfield situations, Baker doesn't need you to have potential. Baker needs you to have skill and talent right now, and it's not really fair to expect Trey Palmer to be able to step into that number 3 role if Russell Gage gets injured, or even when Russell Gage gets injured, if you want to go that route. But behind him, honestly, Kalen Geiger is a good young receiver, but not ready for that role. Devin Tompkins, more of a special teams guy. Cade Warner's an undrafted free agent. Raheem Jarrett is actually a pretty exciting prospect out of Maryland that I was looking forward to seeing somewhere. So he's actually got a little bit of potential. But again, I can't look at any of those guys and say, boom, you're a number 3.
Yeah.
I think David Moore, the veteran who came over to the Buccaneers this offseason, he played in Seattle under Dave Canales when Dave Canales was the passing game coordinator there. So he knows Dave Canales' system. He knows the language. Dave knows Dave. Dave knows David. So they know what to expect out of each other. So I think David Moore could be kind of a dark horse. Like maybe you see him make this roster and he might be on the depth chart as like the 5th receiver.
Sure.
But if Russell Gage goes down, you might actually see David Moore's snaps increase more than you see a guy like Trey Palmer's.
Well, that's going to make it very intriguing to watch during camp. That's for sure. So, and again, Palmer, especially Jarrett. Jarrett was a guy that had a really exciting college career. Not sure why he didn't get drafted, but it happens. He gets an opportunity now.
A lot of receiver talent. That's all you can say.
And Geiger. So I don't know much about Geiger. So is he like the sleeper guy to keep an eye on out of that group, since most of those other guys like Palmer and even Jarrett, we know who these guys are. Geiger, I've never really even seen play.
I would say if there's really a sleeper guy there, you're probably looking at Devin Tompkins. But again, he's more of a return guy, more of a special teams guy. So and that's the problem with the depth of the receiver group. I don't know that there is a true sleeper. There's just a lot of guys who have some potential and maybe you can turn into something.
Okay.
And that's not not trying to throw shade at any of those guys necessarily, but a lot of them are kind of undersized and kind of limited because of that. And what they can do.
You gotta be real, no question about it. By the way, I was just looking over. I see you got a couple of former Rutgers guys on the team. Even though O'Neal, the tackle, was with UCLA last year, so I know he did not have the year he wanted, but he's intriguing. Definitely keep an eye on him. But again, that's offensive line, and then we got tight end, and there are some changes here. So. It's now a pretty young group of tight ends. The veterans are pretty much gone now. Otten is he the guy that they're expecting to take the next step? And what do they like about Durham? Because the top 3 looks like, again, a very intriguing young group.
Yeah. Cade Otton's your starter. Cade Otton's the guy that everybody expects to be tight end number 1 coming in, and like you said, consecutive off seasons. Last off season they lost Rob Gronkowski. This off season they lose Cam Brate. So all their veteran leadership in the tight end room is gone. Now Cade Otton, who's in his 2nd season in the NFL, is the elder statesman from a depth chart plus experience standpoint. I mean, there's some experience behind him that is a little bit older, but he's kind of the main guy. Keeft is more of your blocking guy, but he showed some receiving ability that we didn't expect to see from him last year. So maybe he can build on that. And then Payne Durham is more your traditional receiving type of tight end. And I think that people were really happy with seeing what he was able to do again during mini camps, during OTAs, and all those things. But you always have that asterisk right now. If there's no contact, there's no pads. So we'll see if that really translates. But Payne Durham is a guy that honestly, in a lot of other tight end classes, he might be your top 3 tight end, one of your top 3 tight ends in the NFL draft. But because we had an abnormally talented tight end class this year, he actually ends up getting pushed down. So I think the Buccaneers probably look at Payne Durham as a 5th round pick that they probably would have had to spend a late 3rd or early 4th on in years past.
Before we move on to the defensive side, do you expect them to possibly, the team to, everybody will look at the waiver wire, especially on cutdown day, but if you had to pick a spot where they add a veteran, would that be wide receiver? And do you think they could even do something relatively early if they're a little bit unsure that somebody can actually take over that role if there is an injury, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I would look receiver or I would look running back. And, there's a lot of running backs out there right now. And Dalvin Cook, there's a lot of Seminoles fans that are Buccaneers fans. So Dalvin Cook is a name that a lot of people are looking at. And look, the longer you go into this, I know there's some frustration from the running backs in the NFL right now about contracts, but the longer some of these players, Ezekiel Elliott, Kareem Hunt, Dalvin Cook, to name 3, the further they go, they're going to decide, do you want to play football and make some money, or do you not want to play football and make no money? And I think what a lot of people learn from the Le'Veon Bell situation is not playing football and not making money is not the best way to go. No. So eventually these guys are going to have to take the money that they're being offered versus waiting for the money that they want. Maybe the Buccaneers are in talks with people. If they are, I don't have an inside track on that, but neither does anybody else. Tampa Bay Times Athletic, Fox Sports. None of these guys are reporting that they're hearing rumors. But we all came into this offseason expecting the Buccaneers to do something more than Chase Edmonds in the running back room, and they haven't done it yet.
Do they have the money?
Yeah, I mean, money's, the salary cap is, we on Locked On Bucks, we always like to say that the salary cap is make believe, and to a certain extent it is, but to a certain extent it's not. I think the Mike Evans extension, if you can extend Mike Evans,
okay,
which we do have reports that they are in talks of trying to extend Mike Evans, if you can get that deal done and free up some cash, again, you probably tack some void years on or push some money down the hill a little bit, but you can always free up money. There's always guys with contracts where you can, convert salary to bonus and
true,
and kick that can down the road. So,
by the way, do you expect Evans? Because I know there was a lot of rumors about whether or not he was a potential trade option. Is that still possible, or that's just not going to happen?
No, he's not getting traded. I don't. Nothing that I would know from the Buccaneers would tell me that was ever even a conversation outside of speculation season. That's what it's speculation's there for a reason. But no, Mike Evans is not a traded guy.
As good as he is, and everybody knows he's good, especially in fantasy. Everybody knows he's just a consistent producer. But I don't think people really know how consistent he is. I mean, the guy's a 1,000-yard machine. I don't think I've seen something like that in a while. I look all the time going over stats for, especially a wide receiver, and there's always that 1 year, you miss a few games or, bad quarterback play, whatever. But this dude is just 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, and it's not like he's only been in the league a few years. I mean, I think he's underrated.
Oh, he absolutely is. And he's done it with Tom Brady, which is great, but he's also done it with Jameis Winston. He's done it with Mike Glennon. He's done it with Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
He's done it with, a lot of guys. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's the NFL record holder for 1,000-yard seasons to start a career for a reason. And he's, just a couple, 2 or 3 seasons away from matching Jerry Rice. We'll see if he can make it that far, but he's 2 or 3 seasons away from matching Jerry Rice. So that should tell you, everything you need to know about his production.
All right. Defensively, and this is still, Bowles is still running the show on defense, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
And by the way, how do the fans take to Todd Bowles?
Fans, it's results based. You know what I mean? Like they'll take really any. I mean, Todd Bowles and Bruce Arians' personalities couldn't be more night and day. If you tried, Bruce Arians is boisterous, loud, bravado type of guy. Todd Bowles just is kind of real quiet, reserved. At least forward facing. Inside the building, he's a little bit more of a crack up, but forward facing, he's more reserved, more quiet, doesn't like to answer questions. So personality wise, it can be night and day. But really, at the end of the day, the Bucs fans want what every fan base wants. They just want to win. If you win, they're going to love you no matter what your personality. I mean, look at Bill Parcells. Bill Parcells, probably one of the most unlikable coaches to ever step on a sideline. But because of how much he won, people love him and adore him. But you look at not to twist the knife into Rutgers, but you look at Greg Schiano, comes to the NFL, doesn't win, and his personality runs him out of the league very, very quickly.
All right. Yeah, he's an acquired taste. That's why, he's back where he belongs. Okay. On defense, that defensive front, I mean, this is a big year. I know it's only his second year, but this is a big year for Logan Hall, isn't it? Because it just didn't work out last year, and he could really make the difference, especially if Kancey comes as delivered. And Vitavea, we'll get into him in a minute. But yeah, that's a big deal for this defensive line is Logan Hall.
Yeah, no, it's huge for Logan Hall. Logan's expected to step in and really kind of be a starting defensive end in this Todd Bowles system. And part of that is eating blocks. Part of that is doing your assignment, sealing gaps or sealing edges and all that stuff. But part of it is also getting penetration yourself. Again, Todd Bowles has spent the last really 2 years talking about how much he wants to get an organic pass rush from his 3 down linemen, from his 5 defensive, front guys, including his outside linebackers who are basically stand-up DNs. Logan Hall is a part of that, and there's a part of this Logan Hall evaluation that's a little unfair because he's not a first-round pick, but he was the Buccaneers' first pick in that draft. So, when you look back at memory's sakes, he's the first name you heard in that draft, so he's that first guy. Kind of reminds me of Jonathan Banks when he was the first guy taken by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers out of Mississippi State, I believe, the cornerback when he was drafted. Wasn't a first-round guy, but he was the first name everybody heard. So you kind of get that first-round production expectation attached to you. But look, again, that's what you sign up for. That's what you want to dream about being in the NFL for. So, yeah, he's got to step up. Him and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka have big years ahead of them.
And as far as and by the way, was there a specific issue that Hall had, or was it just everything? It's just as a rookie, he just.
I mean, again, I think if he's just a second round pick and he's not kind of thrust into this key role the way that he was, I think it's fine. But when you add in the kind of the pressure of this is a team that won a Super Bowl not that long ago. This is supposed to be a defensive minded team. This is a Todd Bowles defense. Like there's just a lot of kind of external influences that are sitting on top of Logan Hall. I actually did a numbers dump on Logan Hall. And when you compare him to like other second round defensive ends in their first years and all stuff, he's actually very average. But what Bucs fans and what the Buccaneers were selling was above average. So that's not what you got. That's considered a failure.
Okay. Vita Vea has the last couple of years, it looks like his production has taken a little bit of a dip. But how good is he still? Is he still a top tier defensive tackle? Is he still somebody that you feel very confident is at the upper echelon of at his position in the NFL?
Yeah, absolutely. Vita Vea is an absolute wrecking ball up the middle. You know what I mean? And the issue that you'll always have with defenses is one player can't make the difference. You look at the offense and you kind of say, okay, if you put the right quarterback with this same everything else, that elevates this offense. But you can't really do that with defensive players. I always go back to Ray Lewis with the Baltimore Ravens. He was kind of in his prime and he had a down season. And after that down season, he went to the Ravens head shed and said, listen, I'm an off-ball line. Like, I'm not on the line of scrimmage. I'm off the ball. I can't do what I need to do unless you have dudes up front that can make some space for me. So what do the Baltimore Ravens do? They go out and get Haloti Ngata, and now all of a sudden Ray Lewis is a Hall of Fame caliber player again. But nobody really talked about Haloti Ngata and how much he impacted Ray Lewis. But that's the whole thing. Like Aaron Donald with the Los Angeles Rams, best defensive player probably in the league according to most people. But this year, with all the losses that the Rams have had on their roster, Aaron Donald may not have the greatest season. Even if he has a great individual season, his defense may not be all that great. So it takes a village, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So Vita Vea is an absolute wrecking ball up front. Led the team in sacks last year, which is terrible. You never want your nose tackle leading your team in sacks. But bottom line is he's getting the production that a lot of people aren't getting. And when you look at the struggles from Logan Hall, the absence of Ndamukong Suh, and all those things, offenses are focusing on him. So if guys like Elijah Cansey, if Logan Hall can take a step forward, the return of Shaquille Barrett can force defenses to go elsewhere, Vita Vea may actually be able to produce with his talent jump the way that we kind of see it on film.
And Gaines, he was an important pickup because he's had, 25 starts the last couple of years with the Rams, won a Super Bowl with the Rams as well. And then, having another veteran, as far as a key reserve guy is going to be important. I'm sure he's going to get a lot of snaps.
Well, my understanding is Greg Gaines is going to come into camp starting on the defensive line. But Logan Hall, like I said, from a media standpoint, from a fan standpoint, everybody wants to see him take that step, become that starter, but he's going to have to go get it. He's not going to get handed it to him. And Greg Gaines, again, he's been playing next to Aaron Donald. He's been playing on the Los Angeles Rams defense. He knows what good defense looks like, and he knows how to complement a really good defensive tackle. So when he's playing next to Vita Vea, I promise you there are things that he's going to take from his time with Aaron Donald, and he's going to try to put those things together. And early in OTAs, the Buccaneers talked about the value of Vita Vea being there during OTAs, during the voluntary portion, to make sure that everybody's getting on the same page. He's learning himself. He's learning next to a guy like Greg Gaines, but then they're both also teaching Elijah Cansey, and then hopefully Logan Hall can get into this mix too and become a threat as well. So ideally, what you might go from is one really dominant defensive lineman last year in Vita Vea to two or three really good offense or defensive linemen next to him in Greg Gaines, Logan Hall, Elijah Cansey, or a combination of the three.
Is there another player? I know, overall, is besides those four, anyone else we should keep an eye on the defensive line?
I mean, Patrick O'Connor has always kind of been a steady, he's a steady veteran type of guy that kind of comes in a pinch and does some good things from time to time. Dedrick didn't see as much of him last season as maybe kind of thought when they first added him. But those four guys are essentially your primaries.
Okay.
Patrick O'Connor is a spot guy if needed.
All right, linebacker. So, Levante David just continues to play at an elite level. He's 33 now. Led the team along with White, 124 tackles. So here's the thing, though. I got to ask you, especially with Devin White. First of all, why does Pro Football Focus dislike him so much? And I need to know as far as how good or overrated or underrated is Devin White. Like, what is the deal with it? Because he's going to be – do you think he'll even be here after next year?
That's hard to tell right now. But Devin White being overrated or underrated, like you just kind of mentioned, it really just depends on the publication you're reading. Because some publications will rank him incredibly high. I think ESPN recently did a rankings of players and positions, and Devin White I think was like number 2 or number like something like that, off ball linebacker among those rankings. But then when you look at the span of votes that they put together, his highest vote was obviously number 2, but his lowest vote was unranked. So that kind of shows you the window of how good is Devin White. The best thing I can say is the Devin White potential that we thought was there when he came out of LSU is still there. The problem is that he hasn't fully reached that potential, and he's actually started to regress a little bit. The Super Bowl season was clearly his best season. The Super Bowl run was clearly the best time he's had in the National Football League, and he started to look like that guy who was about to be the most dominant linebacker in the National Football League. Since then, he's kind of slowly regressed. Now, he's not a bad linebacker, okay, but he was on this path of becoming maybe the best off-ball linebacker in the NFL, and he's fallen short of that. And last year, with the struggles with some of the losses they had, especially during the Baltimore Ravens collapse on Thursday Night Football, there have been now there are effort questions. Warren Sapp called him out on social media for his lack of effort, and Devin White. When you're called out, you have two choices. You either take it humbly, you take it with a grain of salt, and you move forward and you get better, or you fight it. Well, Devin White has chosen to fight it. So Devin White wants to come at people who criticize him and tell them that they're wrong and that he's right and all these. And it just has created a PR nightmare around Devin White. And he showed up to mandatory minicamp. It's mandatory, so he showed up, but he didn't practice. And the team did him a solid by saying, we want to make sure he's healthy, so we're gonna wait till training camp and all that stuff. But what the rest of us are reading between the lines is Devin White showed up, didn't want to practice, and the team decided not to make it a bigger deal than it needed to be by saying, no, he's just not practicing. He wants a new contract. The belief is that he wants $100 million like Roquan Smith got. But the problem is he's not playing Roquan Smith football, so he's not going to get Roquan Smith money. If Devin doesn't come off the price point, he's not going to be in Tampa next year. I can tell you that. But because even if he plays up to that price point for one season, I can't see the Buccaneers giving it to him.
Yeah.
Not one, just because of the amount, but two, the cap situation they're in, and three, you have a pretty solid year that ended really well. You've got a down year, and then you've got a great year.
Yeah.
I can't pay you for 5 years great money when you're only giving me one great year.
Sure. And especially with some of these issues that you're just talking about, you're noting that's the kind of stuff that you worry about when you give a player a lot of money. All right, so is that the reason they used up a 5th-round draft pick on a linebacker?
I think so. Yeah, I think you bring in SirVocea Dennis. KJ Britt is a guy they got a few years back, and he's developed to a certain extent, but I don't know that he's ready to take on a big defensive role if he was kind of thrust in that position. So SirVocea Dennis is an athletic type of linebacker, a better pass defender coming out of Pitt than Devin White necessarily was coming out of LSU, and that's really where Devin White's Achilles heel is when you're talking about open field plays or you're talking about pass coverage. So I think SirVocea Dennis is not necessarily a Devin White replacement, right? But kind of the beginning of the Buccaneers understanding, like we might have to replace Lavonte David and Devin White all in the same offseason. So we need to at least get a guy, bring him in, start developing him. If we strike gold, beautiful. If not, then we at least can go, this might be a situation where you see the Bucs go off-ball linebacker in the 1st round next year, off-ball linebacker in the 3rd round next year.
Yeah.
And now you've got those two guys and 2 5th-round picks that you've been developing behind them. That may be, if Lavonte retires and Devin doesn't come back, that may be the situation the Buccaneers find themselves in.
So that's just a question now as far as David. Yeah. Nothing's definitive at this point.
No, nothing's definitive, but, the conversation, he's long in the tooth, so the conversation is there. And, he's a guy that you would love to see retire a Buccaneer. You don't want to see him wearing another uniform.
No. Yeah.
This year they're doing the throwbacks and all that stuff. So, it's certainly a conversation that we're having. Lavonte hasn't really said anything about it, but it's something that's in the back of the minds of the fans and the media.
All right. On the edge, you mentioned Tryon. So, again, yes, definitely improved last year from his rookie season, as you want to see, but need to see a lot more production. He's a 1st-round draft pick. Diaby was drafted in the 3rd round. And then, of course, Barrett's coming back from injury. And then one of, I think, the better bargains in the draft was getting Ramirez in round 6. So, a lot, there's a lot of possibilities there. It looks like they're pretty... they're pretty set as far as a couple of rookies and what they already have veteran-wise.
Yeah, the two rookies, Jose Ramirez and Yaya Diaby, showed some really good energy during rookie camp, OTAs, mini camp. Again, no pads, no hitting, so take it all with a grain of salt. But they certainly look like they're going to bring a little bit of energy into this group. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, yeah, he's the guy that everybody's watching. I mean, Shaq Barrett, how's he going to be coming back from that injury? Usually, injuries like this, the first year back, you're still not all that great. So there's kind of that tempered expectation. But Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is the big one because his fifth-year option is coming due next year. They've got to make a decision on whether or not they're going to keep him or not. And at this pace, if he doesn't improve the pace, I don't see how the Buccaneers justify picking that up next offseason.
Okay. And then we'll take a look at the defensive backfield. Dean has developed into the top dog there. I think from the outside perspective, I would bet most fans who don't follow Tampa Bay would think that Carlton Davis is the number one corner. I think that they look at it, and I don't know whether or not that's because Davis is overrated or not. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know he's a good player, but Dean has clearly been their top corner. Hasn't that been the case?
I mean, I think you can make the argument either way. I think, Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean, I think it's better off just saying they're both the starting corners. You know what I mean? Carlton Davis is longer. He's more physical. Jamel Dean is more athletic, probably has better ball skills, I would say. So they both kind of bring a different kind of flavor. Carlton Davis is a guy who, the bugaboo on him is how many flags he draws. And that's because of his physical play style. And truth be told, he probably has a little bit of a reputation. I remember talking to Ryan Jensen a couple of years ago now about reputations. And he said that he's gone into games and refs have come up to him pregame and said, "Hey, dude, don't pull your crap. We're looking for you." I think Carlton Davis is starting to get a little bit of a reputation just because of how physical he is in the secondary. And sometimes that draws flags. And I think some people get frustrated with that, but I think both those guys are fairly on a fairly even playing field.
Okay.
Just kind of depends on what your flavor of defensive back really is.
All right, and then the big question though is that nickel. So, are they really looking at D. Delaney as the guy? What about Josh Hayes? They drafted him in the 6th round. Anytime you draft a guy in the 6th round, you're not expecting him to start. So, what is right now the question? What is this D. Delaney's job?
I think it's going to be between D. Delaney and Zion McCollum. Zion McCollum in his second year out of Sam Houston, he got some reps there last year. He got some play time there last year. He looked the part of a 5th round draft pick. Like the athleticism is there, the length is there, the want is there, the energy is certainly there. It's now just getting him up to speed in the NFL game. And it's interesting because I actually talked to his collegiate coach after he was drafted, and we talked on Locked On Bucs about how it took Zion until about year 2 or 3 in college to really kind of get up to the college game. Like all the tools were there, all the raw material you needed to build him into a collegiate playmaker were there, but it took a couple years for it to really get going. So Zion McCollum in the NFL, again, he may take that 2 or 3 years it needs, but he's a 5th round pick. So again, how much do you really expect out of him? But I'll take partial blame for that. He's kind of a guy that we attached to very, very early on, and we kind of put his name out there maybe more to give fans the impression that he was maybe going to be one of these fast risers, but he's got the tools. He's got the skills. That's the important thing. And he's got the resiliency. I talked to him a couple times after some rough games in the locker room, and the dude is still smiling. The dude is still aware that he's living his dream. You know what I mean? So he's got the resiliency, and I think that's big, especially when you're talking about defensive backs. So D. Delaney, Zion McCollum, I'm not honestly sure exactly which one of them is going to enter training camp as the number one nickel, but I do think it's probably between those two guys. Nolan Turner maybe as an emergency guy. Like I think I want to say I remember him getting some slot reps in Illinois when he was in college. But that's another story. I think if you get to that position, it's probably more of a break glass in case of emergency situation.
Yeah. And at safety, Winfield is another player that's going to have to he's going to break the bank soon. So I'm sure they're preparing for that. Can't let him go. Neal had a big breakout last year, and then the Bucs signed him. So what is it that you've heard or noticed about Ryan Neal's transition last year? Like, what was it? Was it just, hey, he just needed some time, he was an FCS player, and now what you saw last year, that's what you're going to see moving forward?
Yeah, so talking to Locked On Seahawks host Corbin Smith, we brought him on after the signing because we don't cover the Seahawks, so we don't really know a lot about Ryan Neal coming into the situation. But he said he's basically just a very high energy, well liked in the locker room, incredibly intelligent football player, and I think that's the biggest thing. But when you look at the safeties that have come through Seattle, you can kind of see why he didn't get on the field much, right? It's not really a matter of he's not worth it or not good enough. It's a matter of who's in front of him and they're getting all that burn instead of him. So he comes to Seattle, and I have to believe that Dave Canales, the new offensive coordinator in Tampa, came from Seattle, probably had a hand in saying, like, hey, guys, this is a dude. Like, this is a guy that can help our football team. So let's go ahead and bring him in. So when you have that presumed offensive coordinator, like, it's one thing for a D coordinator to come and say, no, that was my guy from where I came, because there can be some biases there. Like, I really like him, or he does what I tell him to do. When you're the offensive coordinator and you're vouching for a defensive guy, that typically means he gave your offense some problems in practice. And so you have a professional respect for him as well. So I think that speaks highly of Ryan Neal. And again, no pads, no hitting, no contact. But when you look at his fluidity, you look at his ability to read the field, work with his teammates around him. I think that's a big thing in secondaries that a lot of people lose sight of, is not only do you have to know what you're doing, but you have to know where Antoine's going to be. You have to know where Jamel's going to be, where Carlton's going to be, and you have to trust that they're going to be there, but be where you're supposed to be as well. No matter what you're seeing in front of you, trust your assignment, especially if you're in zone coverage. You got to be able to trust your assignment and trust that everybody else is going to do theirs. And so far, he's looked every bit the part that they need him to be.
It looks like it's a pretty wide open affair, sort of like wide receiver a little bit as far as the depth. You mentioned McCollum, though, and of course there was a draft pick there, but there's not a lot of proven talent as far as the backups after the top 5. So I think it's going to give Izzian an opportunity, because I like Izzian, followed him at Rutgers. I think he could have been drafted. I expect he's going to make this team, but that's the thing that I think would be a big question. Wouldn't it be the fact that there just isn't a lot of proven depth back there?
Yeah, the depth is terrifying, more so than the wide receiver group. The depth in the secondary is terrifying. If any of these guys go down to injury, knock on wood that it doesn't happen. If any of these guys go down to injury, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a problem that every offensive coordinator, every quarterback is going to find whoever that guy is, and they're just going to eat him alive.
Yeah, don't want that to happen. All right, and then the second of the special teams, new place kicker, even though McLaughlin is still kind of looking for a home. So this is maybe an opportunity. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is already like his 8th team in 4 years. It's crazy.
He's been around. Yeah, I don't know how many, but he's definitely been around. I like Rodrigo because more from a social standpoint. Like I dig the look. I like the look of Rodrigo Blankenship. But as far as
based off in Indianapolis, yeah,
absolutely. But it's another Bucs fans. It's kind of a rain when it rains it pours situation. You've had a really solid kicking game for the last few years, and now that you lose your Hall of Fame quarterback, now that you have all these other question marks, of course, now we're going to reopen the conversation of the Buccaneers having some issues at kicker, or I don't want to say issues, but question marks at kicker, which is during the Jameis Winston years, there are, I would probably say, about 10 games during the Jameis Winston years that should have been won based off of a kicker that were lost because of a kicker.
Yeah, it's very important. And punting situation looks good. Rookie had a good year last year. And then, like you said, what is Tompkins penciled in as the number 1 guy right now? That's just wide open, though, right?
I mean, I think this is certainly a competition. Yeah, but I think Devin Tompkins comes in as your early favorite. Yeah.
All right. Oh, can you, before I let you go, give me a breakout on offensive defense? Somebody you think will break out?
A breakout player on offense, I think Cade Otton. I think when you talk about breakout players, a lot of times you're talking about like tight end. For a tight end, you're talking about like tight end 1, tight end 2 type territory. I think if you're looking at like fantasy production, and I know it's kind of weird to talk real football mixed with fantasy, but
sure,
I think Cade Otton a breakout season would make him kind of like a tight end 15 to 11. You know what I mean? If he can kind of fall in there somewhere, tight end 11 to 15, I think you consider that a breakout year for him in his second season. Again, 4th round draft pick. So a 4th round draft pick becoming a startable tight end in year 2, I think is pretty impressive. Then a breakout candidate on defense, that's kind of tough because a lot of these guys are kind of known commodities. I would, pressed into an answer, I think I would have to go with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. I just,
oh, really?
No, I'm not going to go Zion yet, but I'll go with JTS just because JTS, the thing about Joe is he's shown flashes, and a lot of it is he needs to learn how to finish. You know what I mean? And I would say that the hardest part about playing, outside linebacker, defensive end, rush end, whatever you want to call it, is getting your early penetration, winning early, and then finishing. Like in that order, those are the 3 difficult things. So he's got the first 2, I don't want to say down, you know what I mean? But they're good. He's got to learn how to finish. And part of that is the first part. The faster you get off, the faster you get behind your guy, the better, the easier it is to finish, right? I just think if I had to choose between a guy like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Logan Hall, and even Zion McCollum, I'd go with JTS.
David, appreciate it, especially the extra time. Hopefully, we'll get an opportunity to talk to you. Look, if we don't talk to you again before the season begins, we definitely we were able to get a whole bunch of content done here. So I appreciate that. And then we'll, without a doubt, if we don't talk to you before the season begins, we'll talk to you during the season. And looking forward to it. So appreciate your time as always, David. Enjoy covering the teams in the preseason, and we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you.